But
Basketball.
obviously, like always, we have a lot to get to. I go through every week trying to figure out what we're going to talk about. I get a whole list of things, and I've said this before. Week comes around, and you can replace it with so many different things
Yeah.
because it's almost like whatever happened last week happened 5 years ago is what it
Mhm.
feels like. But we were just talking about New York City. I have my New York City shirt on tonight.
Yeah.
Yesterday was the 22nd anniversary of the terrorist attacks on New York City, Washington, D.C., and of course the plane crash in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I thought we'd start the show a little bit by remembering September 11th and
Yeah.
talking about where you were, because I'm always
Yeah.
fascinated by where people were and what they were doing and how they heard about it. And, once September 11th happened, I've been fascinated by it in a way of, just there's a lot of sadness, a lot of pride, a lot of just all kinds of emotions. And I still think about it to this day. But Lana, where were you on September 11th of 2001? How did you hear about it?
Insane. So I was at my law firm. I was set to deliver my daughter. She was due. I had her September 27th. So I was very, 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 very pregnant.
Oh,
And,
wow.
right, and I was downtown Boston in a law firm, and I remember I had like this. I'm gonna age myself. Well, of course I am, because you know how far that was,
Well,
right?
we were all 22 years older now than we
Yeah,
were when
right.
September 11th happened.
But I had this transistor radio, and I would always just listen to like
Mm-hmm.
the news, or I think it was Tom Joy in the morning show, and then all of a sudden they broke in and started talking about like, planes originating from wherever. Like they were just, I can't remember all of the places. Was it New York? Was it Boston too? Didn't one come from Boston? I
Yes. Yeah.
cannot remember.
One was New York, one was Boston. Yes.
Yeah. And like I thought it was a joke. And I'm like, no, right? And then like I kept changing the station. I'm like, this shit is really happening. So I was telling everyone, and we were all like, we went into the conference room, turned on the TV, and we were just like, just struck, like awestruck, and not awestruck in like a great way. And then, my husband at the time is calling me like, you have to get home. You have to get home. They're closing the city down because Boston was closed down, and he couldn't get downtown to get me. You couldn't get into downtown Boston, and he could not get in because they shut it down. You could only get out. And when you looked out the window of the line, no, this is a long story, but it was just crazy. The things that were happening, you just saw a mass exodus.
Yeah.
It was so scary because it was traffic and everyone was trying to get out at once. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to sit here safe and wait until, and that's what me and some other people did, because they shut down public transportation. I couldn't get home. They shut down the trains too. Everything was just shut down. So that was in the morning, right? So I didn't get on a train, I think, until maybe later that afternoon, maybe 4 or 5. They finally let the trains run. But yeah, where
Well,
were
I
you?
would imagine, since one of the planes did come from the Boston airport, is that they were very cautious about what was going on in your area.
But I couldn't even get to it. And that was another thing, because I had 2 other kids that were in daycare that I couldn't get to them. So he had to figure out a way from his job to try to get to it was just really even the next day, I think we were still shut down. I think the airlines were shut down the next day as well.
Yeah. I remember, the funny thing is I frequent Las Vegas at least once or twice a year. It's one of my favorite places in the world to go. Me and my friends like to go out there. And we happened to be flying back on September 10th that day. So it happened the very next day. Otherwise, I would have been stuck in Las Vegas. I'm not sure if that would have been a very good thing or a very, very bad thing. But either way, obviously it would have been awful because of the circumstances. But I got up the next morning, was driving to work. The funny thing is usually I turn on the TV in the morning. I would turn on Sports Center. I'd just leave the highlights on, and I'd turn the radio on because I was a big Howard Stern fan. So I'd listen to Howard Stern every single morning. So I was listening to Howard Stern that morning, And I got in my car, started driving to work, listening to him on the radio. They were talking, like Howard does, talking about Pam Anderson and whether or not he can hook up with her or not. Yeah, just Howard Stern kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So somebody interrupted and said, "Hey, a plane just hit the World Trade Center." And they were kind of talking about it a little bit. Then they went back to the shenanigans and everything. So I stopped to get something I usually would stop and get a little drink and a power bar or whatever in the morning. I stopped, got back in my car, and that's when all hell broke loose. And, Howard's studio was, right down the street, not too far from where all of this was taking place. And there, of course, was a bunch of callers calling in, and he stayed on the radio all day long, just giving updates and talking about it. And, then of course you get to a television because all you're hearing about is there's another plane that went in, and your curiosity is just like, this can't be happening. I got to see. You get to a TV and you see this other plane, something you think you would never see in your entire life. And it just looked like an action movie that you would never, want to actually have happen. And, all these explosions, and you're just like, man. And then you hear about what's going on in Washington. Then you hear about the other plane crash. Yeah. And no matter where you're at, you're freaked out.
You are freaked out. With the visions of what we were seeing, like the firefighters running into the buildings, you're seeing like real life at the minute reactions from people. And then when they started reporting on the people that started jumping from the buildings, that's when I was just like,
and it wasn't even the reporting too, because some of them you could even see it. They're not anticipating people jumping from the building.
Right.
So
while they were
reporting,
pictures. Right.
Yeah. And, I've watched so many documentaries about this. I've watched so many different things because it just, to me, it's like, it's so hard to believe that something like that happened in this country. And it left me thinking now, because I do remember, there's always something good that comes from tragedy. You got to try to find something good. And the only thing good that I can think about was subsequent to 9/11, the weeks after, it just felt like everybody in America was as patriotic as you could possibly be. I think we've talked about this on the show before, but it didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter who you voted for. Nothing mattered at that time other than we are all Americans. We are in this together. We love each other. We smiled at each other. We are looking out for each other. It was a good vibe and a good feeling from something that just came from something that obviously should have never happened. And B, unfortunately it did. And, it was, but like I said, I don't even know what B was. I said B for some reason, but it was a good feeling in the country at that time. And I'm afraid that if something like that happened now, it would be extremely political, and there'd be a lot of finger pointing and blaming and impeachments, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But
I was going to ask you that question. That's exactly what I was going to say. What do you think would happen right now if that were to, unfortunately, hoping that it never does, but happen now? Like, you're right, it would be politicized. It would be, Marjorie Taylor Greene popped in my head saying it's New York. That's what they get.
That is exactly right. Yep. Yeah. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene was one who she's a 9/11 denier too. So she didn't even think it happened. But it's funny how you had the same question of something that I said without, even telling that we both had the same feeling that is almost definitely what would happen. You would see a lot of Republicans who would put that aside, but you would just have those fringe that would put it out there and have their internet army on their side, and would just lead to the same kind of shit we see nowadays. So, but anyway, you always, and I saw another horrible story the other day is that there are still people, and one recently, are still dying from that tragic day, based on a lot of the toxins and
Yeah.
stuff that took in their body during the cleanup. It's really sad. I was actually in New York City in May, and it was the first time I was able to visit the Ground Zero and the new building. And I went to the museum and, saw all that stuff, and the fountain. And it was really a powerful moment. And there was a place where they have, they set up sort of a memorial for everybody that died post 9/11. And they
Mm,
said that there's just too many people that died from it, that they can't even fit enough, of those memorials. So they just have one big memorial for everybody that passed away. And it's awful, sad thing. And, we obviously hope nothing like that ever happens again. We, at the time, and I don't want to get too much into this, we had the intelligence that something like this would happen. But finger pointing, all that stuff at this point is probably irrelevant. But yeah, that's where I was. And, hopefully we never see anything like that again.
didn't the Republicans vote against whatever expanded health care for the 9/11 victims or
Well,
some?
John Stewart was huge in that. And he showed up to Congress and made, if I
Right.
remember correctly, a
That's
very
right. Yeah.
passionate
Yeah.
speech
Right.
in front of Congress. And gosh, you talk about a guy who walks the walk. It's John Stewart. He doesn't just talk about, you need to do
Right.
more for the firefighters and for the police officers on that day. He was also very big on getting the PAC Act
Yes.
passed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked about this before. If John Stewart could run for president at some point, I think he'd win a
Seriously.
landslide.
Seriously.
I don't think he ever would, but he has proven that he can get things done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.